The loudest crowd is not always standing with the truth. The chant began with one trembling voice before spreading across the ancient stone plaza like wildfire carried by the wind. "Traitor!" Another voice answered. Then another. Within seconds, hundreds of wolves stood shoulder to shoulder beneath the silver banners of Mooncrest Pack, repeating the accusation until it echoed against every tower and every rooftop surrounding the square. At the center of it all stood Evelyn Carter. She did not look like the villain their fear had created. At 24 years old, the young Omega wore nothing more than a simple cream-colored dress beneath a weathered traveling cloak, its edges stained with dust from the hurried march that had brought her there. Loose strands of chestnut hair framed her pale face, while her emerald eyes held neither anger nor panic. They held something far more heartbreaking: disappointment. She recognized nearly every face staring back at her. The blacksmith who had repaired her mother's tools without ever asking for payment. The elderly baker whose grandchildren she had once cared for during difficult winters. The children she had taught to gather healing herbs beyond the eastern creek. Today none of them looked at her as though she belonged among them anymore. Elder Marcus stepped onto the raised platform at the center of the square, his ceremonial robes moving gently in the afternoon breeze. The ancient staff in his hand struck the stone once, silencing the growing whispers. "Evelyn Carter," he announced, his voice carrying across the plaza. "You stand accused of betraying Mooncrest Pack by revealing sacred border routes to unknown outsiders." A murmur rolled through the crowd. Some nodded immediately, relieved that someone else had already decided what to believe. Others looked uncertain but remained silent. Fear often borrowed confidence from louder voices. Marcus continued without hesitation. "Because of your actions, trust has been broken. The council has reached its judgment." Evelyn lifted her eyes toward him for the first time. "Did anyone ask whether the accusation was true?" she asked quietly. The question lingered in the air, longer than anyone expected. No one answered. Marcus lowered his gaze only for a heartbeat before speaking again. "The council has spoken." Evelyn slowly looked beyond the platform toward the ancient pine forest rising beyond the village walls. Somewhere out there, the wind still carried the same scent it had when she was a little girl running through those woods beside her mother. The forest had never judged anyone. It simply remembered every season that passed. "Then the council has spoken before listening," she replied softly. A man near the front folded his arms. "Listen to her," he muttered. "She still thinks she can fool us." Another voice shouted, "Send her away." Soon dozens joined in again. "Traitor!" The sound rolled across the square like distant thunder. Evelyn closed her eyes for only a moment. She could have defended herself. She could have repeated everything she had seen near the eastern border 3 nights earlier. She could have revealed the strange footprints, the unfamiliar cloaks disappearing into the darkness, and the questions no elder had ever allowed her to finish asking. But deep inside, she understood something painful. When people decided to fear a lie, the truth often arrived too late to be welcomed. Elder Marcus raised his staff once more. "By order of Mooncrest Pack, Evelyn Carter is stripped of her place among us. From this moment forward, you are forbidden to return unless summoned by the council." Silence followed the declaration before scattered applause slowly spread through the crowd. Some clapped because they believed justice had been served. Others because they feared becoming the next person everyone questioned. Evelyn reached beneath her cloak and removed a small silver crescent pendant resting against her heart. It had belonged to her mother since before Evelyn was born. For several seconds, she stared at its familiar surface before placing it carefully on the edge of the stone platform. "My mother always told me that a home is not measured by the people who welcome you," she said quietly, "but by the kindness you leave behind." Without another word, she turned toward the open gates leading beyond Mooncrest. No tears. No desperate plea. Only quiet dignity carried her forward. A little boy standing near the fountain tugged gently on his father's sleeve. "Dad," he whispered, "Miss Evelyn helped me find my puppy last spring." "She cannot really be." His father gently lowered the child's hand before he could finish. "Do not ask questions today." Those words hurt far more than the chants behind her. Step by step, Evelyn crossed the final stones of the village road and disappeared beyond the towering wooden gates. None of the villagers noticed the enormous white wolf watching silently from the shadows beneath the distant pines, its silver eyes never leaving the lone Omega as she walked into exile. Even fewer noticed the tall man standing beside the wolf, his dark traveling cloak blending almost perfectly with the forest. His expression remained calm, but something about the scene before him refused to match the reports he had received. He had traveled hundreds of miles expecting to find a dangerous traitor. Instead, he had just watched a young woman surrender everything she loved without allowing hatred to replace her compassion. As Evelyn vanished deeper into the endless forest, the stranger rested one hand upon the white wolf's shoulder and quietly spoke words meant for no one else. "Either everyone in that village is telling the truth," he murmured, "or every one of them has been taught the same lie." The forest welcomed Evelyn Carter with the same quiet grace that her own people no longer could. As the towering wooden gates of Mooncrest disappeared behind rolling hills, the endless northern wilderness stretched before her beneath a pale blue sky, brushed with drifting clouds. The scent of pine filled the cool afternoon air, mixing with damp earth and wildflowers blooming between weathered stones along the forgotten trail. She walked without looking back. There was nothing behind her except memories that no longer recognized her. Every few hundred yards, she paused only long enough to listen to the forest around her. Birds still sang without fear. A nearby creek continued its endless journey over smooth rocks. The wind whispered through the branches exactly as it always had. Nature had never cared about accusations. It accepted every traveler without demanding explanations. Several hours later, the afternoon sun began slipping toward the western mountains. Evelyn knelt beside the crystal-clear stream to refill her small leather canteen. As she looked into the moving water, her reflection seemed unfamiliar. She saw the same emerald eyes and pale face she had carried all her life, yet something inside them had changed. Not hope. Hope still remained. It was certainty that had disappeared. For the first time, she truly did not know where tomorrow would lead. A sudden whimper interrupted her thoughts. Soft, weak, barely noticeable above the sound of rushing water. Evelyn stood immediately, following the sound through thick ferns until she reached a small clearing hidden beneath towering cedars. There, beneath the fallen branch of an old pine tree, lay a young white wolf struggling to free one front leg trapped beneath the heavy wood. The frightened animal pulled again and again, only tightening the branches around itself. Its silver eyes widened the moment it noticed Evelyn standing nearby. She stopped several feet away instead of rushing forward. "Easy," she whispered gently. "You have already fought enough for today." The young wolf released another uncertain cry, but no longer struggled. Evelyn slowly removed her cloak and folded it neatly on the grass before searching the ground for a sturdy fallen limb. Using it carefully as a lever, she lifted the broken branch just enough for the trapped paw to slip free. The wolf stumbled backward, favoring its injured leg, but refusing to run. Evelyn tore a narrow strip from the edge of her sleeve and slowly wrapped the swollen paw, while speaking in the same calm voice her mother had always used with frightened animals. "Sometimes surviving is enough," she said quietly. "You do not have to prove your strength every minute." When she finished, the young wolf took several cautious steps away before stopping. For a long moment, it simply watched her. Then, almost as if offering silent gratitude, it lowered its head once before disappearing between the trees. Evelyn smiled faintly. It was the first genuine smile to touch her face since leaving Mooncrest. She gathered her cloak and continued north, unaware that high upon a rocky ridge overlooking the clearing, another pair of silver eyes had witnessed every moment. The great white wolf standing beside the cloaked traveler remained perfectly still, its ears raised toward the direction where the younger wolf had disappeared. The man beside it lowered the brass spyglass from his eyes without speaking. His calm expression revealed neither surprise nor satisfaction, only deeper curiosity. Rowan guided his horse quietly alongside him. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "if that truly is the woman the council condemned, she is unlike anyone described in their reports." The cloaked traveler kept watching the winding trail below where Evelyn's small figure gradually disappeared into the forest. "Reports describe actions," he replied softly. "Character is revealed when no one believes they are being watched." Rowan hesitated before asking the question that had troubled him since they entered Mooncrest territory. "Do you believe she is innocent?" The traveler rested one hand upon the shoulder of the great white wolf. "I believe I have traveled too far to accept another person's judgment without seeing the truth for myself. The white wolf suddenly lifted its nose toward the breeze, then quietly started walking along the ridge in the same direction Evelyn had taken. The traveler watched his loyal companion for a brief moment before following. The animal had never wasted its instincts. If it chose to follow the lonely Omega into the northern wilderness, then perhaps the truth had already begun leading the way. The third morning greeted Evelyn Carter with a blanket of silver mist stretching across the northern valleys, soft enough to blur the distant mountains into quiet shadows. She had slept beneath the shelter of an ancient oak where the forest floor was covered with moss as soft as a woven blanket. For the first time since leaving Mooncrest, she woke to silence instead of whispers, and although loneliness still rested heavily upon her heart, the wilderness offered something the village no longer could. It gave her room to breathe. She folded her blanket, secured her small satchel across one shoulder, and continued along a narrow trail leading toward the old merchant road. Her supplies were growing lighter with every passing mile, yet she refused to worry. Her mother had always believed that generosity found its way back to those who never demanded it. As the sun climbed higher, Evelyn reached a small farming settlement tucked between rolling green hills. Smoke drifted peacefully from stone chimneys while children laughed beside a weathered wooden fence. She intended only to refill her canteen before continuing north, but a familiar sound stopped her. A frightened horse stood beside an overturned produce cart, nervously stamping one hoof while apples rolled across the dirt road. An elderly farmer struggled alone to lift one of the broken wooden wheels back into place. Without introducing herself, Evelyn quietly set down her satchel and hurried over. Together they gathered the scattered fruit before she searched the nearby trees for a sturdy branch strong enough to support the damaged axle. Using simple knots she had learned years earlier, she secured the wheel well enough for the farmer to reach the next village safely. The old man wiped his brow and smiled with grateful eyes. "You have saved me an entire day's journey," he said warmly. "Please, at least allow me to repay your kindness with lunch." Evelyn smiled politely and shook her head. "Keep your food for your family. I have already received enough." Before he could insist, she picked up her satchel and quietly resumed walking, leaving behind nothing except a repaired cart and another stranger wondering why someone carrying so little had been willing to give so much. High above the valley, hidden among towering pines, the cloaked traveler observed the entire scene through the branches. Rowan guided his horse beside him and looked down toward the winding road. "She never asked his name," he said quietly. "She did not even tell him hers." The traveler continued watching until Evelyn disappeared beyond another hillside. "People seeking admiration make certain they are remembered," he replied. "She seems determined to leave only kindness behind." Rowan studied his king carefully. "You have stopped calling her the accused." The traveler allowed himself the smallest hint of a smile. "Because every mile places more distance between her and the woman described by the council." As afternoon drifted into early evening, Evelyn followed the sound of rushing water toward a narrow wooden bridge crossing a mountain stream. On the far side, she found a young girl sitting alone beside the road, hugging her knees while trying not to cry. A basket filled with wild herbs had spilled down the rocky slope below, too steep for the child to climb safely. Evelyn carefully descended the hillside, collecting every bundle one by one before returning them to the grateful girl. "My grandmother needs these," the child explained with a relieved smile. "She cannot walk this far anymore." Evelyn gently placed the basket into her hands. "Then you should hurry home before sunset." The little girl looked up with curious eyes. "What is your name?" Evelyn hesitated only for a heartbeat. "Just another traveler." She turned away before the child could ask another question, disappearing once again beneath the towering pines. Neither of them noticed the great white wolf watching from across the stream. The magnificent animal remained perfectly still until Evelyn vanished beyond the next bend in the trail. Then it slowly walked toward the place where she had stood only moments earlier, lowering its head to the ground before quietly continuing after her. When the cloaked traveler reached the bridge several minutes later, he saw his loyal companion already waiting farther up the road, patiently facing north. Rowan looked from the wolf to the fading footprints along the dusty trail. He has never followed a stranger this willingly. The traveler rested one thoughtful hand against the wolf's broad shoulder. "Perhaps," he said softly, He recognized something that the rest of us have been too distracted to see. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared beyond the mountains, the king realized his journey was no longer about confirming a judgment. It had become a search for the truth hidden beneath it, and every act of quiet compassion from the lonely Omega made one question impossible to ignore. If she had lied to everyone, why did every honest thing she did happen only when she believed no one was watching? The following morning dawned beneath a sky painted with pale gold as Evelyn Carter climbed a winding trail leading into the northern highlands, where towering cliffs overlooked endless forests stretching beyond the horizon. Every step carried her farther from Mooncrest, yet the questions she had left behind refused to fade. She could still hear Elder Marcus declaring her guilty. She could still see familiar faces turning away without asking what had truly happened. But one memory returned more often than all the others. The strange footprints she had discovered near the eastern border only days before her exile. Someone had crossed into Mooncrest long before anyone accused her, and somehow that truth had vanished before anyone was willing to hear it. The narrow trail eventually led her to the crumbling remains of an ancient watchtower almost hidden beneath climbing ivy and weathered stone. Her mother had once spoken about forgotten outposts scattered throughout the northern territories, places where old guardians had quietly watched the borders for generations before history moved on without them. Drawn by quiet curiosity, Evelyn stepped through the broken archway and into the abandoned tower. Dust floated through shafts of sunlight pouring from the collapsed roof, while vines wrapped around cracked stone walls reclaimed by time. Most of the old furniture had long since rotted away, leaving only scattered beams and fallen masonry across the floor. As she slowly explored the ruins, something unusual caught her attention. One corner of the tower appeared strangely undisturbed. Kneeling beside a loose stone, she brushed away years of dust until her fingertips touched a small, weathered wooden box carefully hidden beneath the floor. The faded carving on its lid immediately stole her breath. It was the crest of Mooncrest, the same crescent moon her mother had once worn upon the silver pendant now left behind in the village square. Evelyn carefully lifted the fragile box into the sunlight. The rusted clasp gave way almost effortlessly. Inside rested a leather journal wrapped inside faded blue cloth that had somehow protected it from years of moisture. She opened the first page slowly, and tears quietly gathered in her emerald eyes before she had finished reading the familiar handwriting. It belonged to her mother. The early entries described ordinary days, helping neighbors, gathering herbs, watching spring flowers bloom beneath the old pines. Then the tone changed. One sentence seemed to reach across the years directly into Evelyn's heart. If anyone ever accuses an honest soul before asking questions, remember that fear often serves those hiding the truth. Evelyn turned another page. More entries spoke of unusual meetings among several council elders, unexplained visitors appearing near the eastern border, and growing concern that someone inside Mooncrest valued influence more than justice. She barely noticed the passing time until distant hoofbeats echoed somewhere beyond the ruined walls. Instinct immediately returned. Carefully wrapping the journal inside her blanket, she slipped through a narrow opening behind the tower moments before two unfamiliar riders entered the courtyard searching the abandoned ruins. Hidden among dense pine trees overlooking the watchtower, the cloaked traveler observed everything from above, while Rowan quietly studied the strangers below. "They are searching for something," Rowan whispered. The traveler nodded slowly. "Not something." His silver eyes remained fixed upon the hidden trail where Evelyn had disappeared. Someone found what they came to destroy. After the riders eventually left empty-handed, the traveler descended into the ruins. The old tower stood silent once more except for birds nesting beneath the broken roof. Near the disturbed stones where the wooden box had rested for years, he noticed a single pressed wildflower accidentally left behind. Carefully lifting it between his fingers, he looked around the forgotten chamber before speaking almost to himself. She is no longer simply running from a false accusation. Rowan stepped closer. Then what is she running toward? The traveler slipped the delicate flowers safely inside his cloak. The truth. Outside, the great white wolf lifted its head toward the northern wind before calmly walking in the same direction Evelyn had taken. The traveler followed without hesitation. Every discovery now pointed toward the same unsettling conclusion. The accusation against the lonely Omega had never been the beginning of the story. It had only been the final move in a plan someone had started years before, and somewhere ahead, carrying nothing more than an old journal and unwavering kindness, Evelyn unknowingly held the missing piece capable of changing the fate of an entire kingdom. The narrow mountain trail curved gently through towering evergreens as Evelyn Carter continued deeper into the Northern Territories, keeping the weathered journal wrapped securely inside her satchel. The faded pages seemed heavier with every mile she walked, not because of their weight, but because every sentence written by her mother revealed another piece of a truth someone had worked very hard to erase. She stopped briefly beside a crystal-clear spring, carefully opening the journal once more. Between two worn pages rested a folded piece of parchment she had not noticed before. Unfolding it with careful hands, she discovered a hand-drawn map marked with forgotten border trails surrounding Mooncrest. One location had been circled several times in dark ink beside a single handwritten sentence. "The truth waits where honest eyes still watch." Evelyn quietly repeated the words to herself, wondering why her mother had hidden them instead of bringing them before the council. Before she could think further, the distant sound of horses echoed through the valley. She immediately folded the map, slipped the journal safely away, and stepped behind a cluster of ancient pines overlooking the road below. Two unfamiliar riders passed beneath the trees, studying a map almost identical to the one hidden inside her satchel. "She cannot have gone far," one of them said. The old tower was already empty. The other looked toward the northern hills. "Search every trail leading to the high pass. We cannot let that journal reach anyone outside." Mooncrest. Their voices slowly faded into the distance, leaving only the gentle whisper of the wind. Evelyn remained hidden until the sound of hoofbeats disappeared completely. Her heart grew unexpectedly calm. She no longer questioned whether the journal mattered. Someone else had already answered that question for her. Several miles away, the cloaked traveler and Rowan reached a quiet ranger station built from weathered logs near the edge of the forest. An elderly border ranger welcomed them inside, offering fresh water after recognizing the royal seal hidden beneath the traveler's cloak. "You are searching for the young woman," the old ranger observed. The traveler nodded. "You have seen her?" "Yesterday morning." The ranger smiled faintly. "She repaired the broken fence surrounding my herb garden before I even noticed it had collapsed." Rowan exchanged another glance with the traveler. "Did she tell you where she was going?" "No," the ranger answered. "She asked only one question." The traveler leaned forward slightly. "What was it?" "She wanted to know whether strangers had crossed Mooncrest's eastern border during the past month." Silence settled across the small cabin. The old ranger continued before either man spoke again. "I told her the truth. I reported unusual tracks several nights before her exile. The council thanked me, then ordered everyone to stop discussing the matter." The traveler slowly lowered his eyes. Every honest witness he encountered offered another piece of the same forgotten story. "Did anyone investigate your report?" he asked. The ranger shook his head. "Not that I ever saw." Outside, the great white wolf suddenly lifted its head toward the northern breeze before quietly walking away from the cabin. Rowan watched the animal disappear between the trees. "He has found her trail again." The traveler thanked the ranger before following without hesitation. By late afternoon, Evelyn reached a peaceful meadow overlooking distant snow-capped peaks where an exhausted family struggled beside a broken wagon. One wool had slipped loose while attempting to cross uneven ground, leaving the parents unsure how to continue with two small children. Waiting patiently nearby, without introducing herself, Evelyn searched the nearby woods until she found a sturdy branch suitable for reinforcing the damaged axle. Working carefully beside the grateful father, she helped secure the wheel well enough for the wagon to travel safely to the next village. "Please," the mother said warmly, "allow us to share supper with you." Evelyn smiled with gentle gratitude. "Your children should enjoy it instead." She quietly gathered her satchel and resumed her journey before anyone could ask her name. Hidden among the trees overlooking the meadow, the traveler watched the family wave thankfully as Evelyn disappeared into the fading light. Rowan looked toward his king. Every witness tells the same story. The traveler rested one thoughtful hand against the great white wolf standing beside him. Because kindness leaves the same memory wherever it goes. As the evening sky turned shades of gold and deep blue, He watched the lonely Omega vanish beyond another distant ridge, carrying a journal capable of exposing years of deception, without realizing that every step north brought her closer to the one man determined to protect both the truth she carried and the future she believed she had already lost. The sun had almost disappeared behind the western mountains when Evelyn Carter reached a quiet valley where a narrow stream wound through tall pines and wildflowers swayed gently beneath the evening breeze. After days of constant travel, the peaceful clearing seemed like the first place where the weight upon her shoulders became just a little lighter. She gathered several fallen branches, built a small campfire, and carefully removed the weathered journal from her satchel. The fading light illuminated the familiar handwriting across its worn pages as she continued reading her mother's final entries. One sentence seemed to stand apart from all the others. When the truth finally finds its voice, trust the one who seeks answers before judgment. Evelyn quietly repeated the words to herself, wondering whether such a person truly existed. Before she could read another page, the sound of approaching footsteps drifted through the trees. Instinctively, she slipped the journal back into her satchel and stood. A lone traveler emerged from the forest wearing a dark cloak dusted with miles of road. His silver eyes reflected the warm glow of the fire, while calm confidence rested upon every movement. He stopped several feet away, careful not to appear threatening. "Good evening," he said warmly. "I noticed your fire from the trail. Would you mind if I rested here for a few minutes before continuing?" Evelyn studied him quietly. There was something unusual about him. He carried himself like someone accustomed to responsibility, yet his voice held genuine humility. After a brief pause, she nodded toward a fallen log beside the fire. "There is enough warmth for 2 travelers." The man smiled gratefully and took a seat across from her. For several minutes, neither spoke. The gentle crackle of burning wood filled the silence while the stream continued its endless song nearby. Finally, the traveler looked toward the stars slowly appearing above the treetops. "You have been walking alone for quite some time." Evelyn offered a faint smile. "Long enough to discover that the forest asks fewer questions than people do." He nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes questions are asked only after someone has already decided upon the answer." Evelyn looked at him with quiet surprise. "You sound as though you have seen that happen before." "More than once," he admitted. "And every time it costs an innocent person something they can never fully recover." The conversation settled into an unexpected ease. They spoke about changing seasons, forgotten roads, mountain villages, and the quiet comfort found beneath open skies. Neither asked the other's full name. Neither spoke about kingdoms or councils. For a little, while they were simply 2 strangers sharing a peaceful evening beneath the stars. Suddenly, the great white wolf stepped silently from the trees. Instead of remaining beside the traveler, it walked directly toward Evelyn. She smiled with gentle recognition, kneeling to greet the magnificent animal exactly as she had greeted the injured young wolf days earlier. The wolf calmly rested its head against her hand before sitting quietly beside her campfire. The traveler watched without hiding his surprise. "He has never trusted a stranger so quickly," he said softly. Evelyn stroked the wolf's thick white fur. "Perhaps he no longer sees me as one." At that very moment, hurried footsteps approached through the forest. Rowan emerged from the shadows before stopping abruptly as his eyes met the cloaked traveler. Without thinking, he bowed respectfully. "Your Majesty," he said. The words hung motionless in the cool evening air. Evelyn slowly lifted her eyes from the white wolf to the man sitting across the fire. The quiet traveler held her gaze for several long seconds before offering a small, honest nod. "My name is Cale Ashford," he said calmly, "and I owe you the truth." For several long seconds, the only sound in the valley was the quiet crackling of the campfire as Evelyn Carter looked across the flames at the man she had believed to be nothing more than another traveler. The warmth she had begun to feel was suddenly replaced by confusion, not because she feared him, but because every conversation they had shared now carried a different meaning. Cale Ashford remained seated where he was, making no attempt to step closer. The great white wolf rested peacefully beside Evelyn, as though reminding both of them that trust had not disappeared simply because the truth had arrived. Rowan lowered his head again, realizing he had revealed the king's identity sooner than intended. Cale glanced briefly toward his captain before returning his attention to Evelyn. "You deserve to hear it from me," he said quietly. "Not this way." Evelyn studied his calm expression. You knew who I was from the beginning. It was not an accusation. It was simply the truth. Cale nodded without hesitation. Yes. She looked down at the dancing firelight reflecting across the stream. Then everything you asked me was part of an investigation. He allowed a moment of silence before answering. It began as one. Evelyn waited. And now? Cale's silver eyes never left hers. Now I believe someone wanted the world to stop asking questions about you. The words settled gently between them. They were not dramatic. They were not spoken to impress her. They carried the quiet certainty of a man who had spent days watching actions instead of listening to rumors. Evelyn slowly reached into her satchel and removed the weathered journal wrapped in faded blue cloth. She held it carefully in both hands before offering it across the fire. Then perhaps you should see what I found. Cale accepted the journal with remarkable care, turning each fragile page as though handling something sacred. The familiar handwriting immediately caught his attention. He read silently for several minutes while Rowan stood nearby, patiently waiting. As Cale reached the passages describing unusual meetings among the Mooncrest Council and unexplained visitors crossing the eastern border, the calm confidence in his expression slowly gave way to thoughtful concern. He turned another page and found the sentence that had remained in Evelyn's thoughts since discovering the journal. If anyone ever accuses an honest soul before asking questions, remember that fear often serves those hiding the truth. Cale closed the journal gently and looked toward the dark forest surrounding the valley. This was written long before your exile, he said quietly. Evelyn nodded. My mother believed something was wrong inside the council years ago. Rowan stepped closer. Combined with the ranger's testimony and the travelers searching the watchtower, this changes everything. Cale rested the journal upon his knee, carefully connecting every piece gathered during the journey. The unexplained border crossings, the ignored reports, the hidden journal, the strangers searching for it. None of it pointed toward Evelyn. Every path led back to the same unanswered question. Who benefited from calling an innocent woman a traitor before the truth could be heard? The great white wolf suddenly lifted its head toward the darkness beyond the trees, ears alert for only a moment before relaxing again. Cale smiled faintly. Even he knows there is no danger here. Evelyn looked at the magnificent animal resting beside her. He trusted me long before anyone else did. Cale nodded. He has always judged hearts more accurately than crowds. The moon rose, higher above the valley, bathing the clearing in soft silver light. Cale carefully returned the journal to Evelyn. You are not carrying this burden alone anymore. She searched his face, trying to decide whether she could truly believe those words after everything she had endured. For the first time since leaving Mooncrest, she found herself wanting to believe someone again. Cale stood slowly and looked toward the southern horizon where the distant mountains hid the village that had condemned her. Tomorrow, he said with quiet resolve, we return to Mooncrest. Evelyn looked at him in surprise. Return. Cale met her eyes with calm determination. Not so they can judge you again. This time they will answer for the questions they refused to ask. The journey back to Mooncrest began before sunrise, when the first light painted the mountain peaks with soft shades of gold and silver. Evelyn Carter walked beside Cale Ashford in thoughtful silence, while Rowan followed several steps behind, allowing the two of them the quiet they both seemed to need. The great white wolf moved gracefully along the forest path, never wandering far from Evelyn, as though its loyalty had already made a choice that words could never explain. Every mile south carried Evelyn closer to the place that had rejected her, yet strangely, fear no longer walked beside her. She still remembered every voice that had condemned her, every familiar face that had looked away, but now she also carried something stronger than painful memories. She carried the truth. As the morning passed, they reached the old ranger station where the elderly border ranger greeted them with visible relief. The moment he recognized Cale, he bowed respectfully before turning to Evelyn with a gentle smile. I was hoping someone would finally listen, he said quietly. Cale nodded. Today, every honest voice will be heard. The ranger disappeared inside his small cabin before returning with a weathered leather notebook containing dated patrol records from the weeks leading up to Evelyn's exile. Every unusual set of tracks, every unexplained crossing near Mooncrest's eastern border, every report submitted to the council had been carefully recorded. Rowan accepted the notebook and compared the dates with the entries inside Evelyn's mother's journal. The details matched with remarkable precision. The forgotten reports had never disappeared. They had simply been ignored. Cale looked toward Evelyn. This is no longer only your story. She met his eyes with quiet understanding. It belongs to everyone who was never given the chance to be heard. By late afternoon, the towers of Mooncrest appeared beyond the rolling hills, standing exactly as they had the day Evelyn walked away alone. Only this time she did not return alone. Royal banners bearing the crest of the Northern Kingdom fluttered beside Cale as they approached the main gate, immediately drawing the attention of guards who hurried to announce the unexpected arrival of their king. Within minutes, the village square began filling once again. Families gathered in uncertain silence while council elders assembled upon the same stone platform where Evelyn had once been condemned. Elder Marcus forced a polite smile as Cale stepped into the center of the square. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "this is an unexpected honor." Cale's expression remained calm. Truth often arrives without an invitation. A quiet murmur spread through the crowd as Evelyn walked into the square beside him. Some villagers lowered their eyes in embarrassment. Others stared in open disbelief. The little boy who had once questioned her exile immediately recognized her and smiled before his father gently placed a reassuring hand upon his shoulder instead of silencing him this time. Cale accepted the ranger's notebook from Rowan before lifting Evelyn's mother's journal for everyone to see. "Several days ago," he began, his steady voice carrying across the silent plaza, "I began searching for the woman this council called a traitor. Along that journey, I found frightened travelers who remembered only her kindness, honest witnesses whose reports were ignored, and written records that reveal important questions were buried long before judgment was announced." He slowly opened the journal to the marked page. Justice does not begin by choosing someone to blame. Justice begins by searching for the truth. The crowd remained completely silent. Elder Marcus shifted uneasily, but said nothing. For the first time since returning, Evelyn noticed uncertainty replacing certainty in the faces surrounding her. People were no longer looking at her as though she carried guilt. They were beginning to wonder whether they had carried it themselves. As the warm afternoon breeze lifted the silver banners above the square, Cale calmly closed the journal and looked directly toward the council. "Before another word is spoken," he said firmly, "there is one question that every elder standing here must answer." The ancient square remained completely silent after Cale Ashford asked his final question. No elder answered. The morning breeze drifted through the silver banners above Mooncrest, yet even the wind seemed unwilling to disturb the weight of that moment. Cale calmly looked from one council member to another before speaking again. If every report about unusual border crossings was ignored, if every witness was dismissed before being heard, and if this journal was hidden instead of examined, then tell your people why the investigation ended before the truth was ever allowed to begin. Elder Marcus lowered his eyes toward the worn stone beneath his feet. For the first time since standing before the people of Mooncrest, certainty had disappeared from his expression. Around the square, quiet whispers slowly replaced the confident voices that had once condemned Evelyn Carter without hesitation. The elderly ranger stepped forward and presented his original patrol records. Rowan carefully opened the notebook beside Evelyn's mother's journal so everyone could see that the dates matched perfectly. The forgotten reports had existed all along. They had simply never been allowed to matter. One by one, villagers remembered their own experiences. The old farmer spoke about the young traveler who repaired his wagon without accepting payment. The innkeeper described the quiet woman who helped strangers before disappearing without asking for recognition. Parents remembered the children Evelyn had comforted. Neighbors remembered the kindness she had shown during difficult winters, and the little boy who had questioned her exile stepped out from the crowd once more. This time his father did not silence him. The child looked directly at Evelyn with innocent honesty. "I knew you were never a bad person." Those simple words carried more weight than every accusation spoken days before. Evelyn felt tears gather in her eyes, not because she wanted revenge, but because someone had finally chosen to ask a question instead of repeating an answer. Cale turned toward the gathered villagers. A strong pack is not one that never makes mistakes. A strong pack is willing to correct them when the truth is finally revealed. He then looked at Evelyn with quiet respect. You lost your home because others feared uncertainty more than they valued honesty. That will never happen under my watch again. The crowd slowly parted as several villagers approached Evelyn one after another. No grand speeches were needed. Some simply lowered their heads. Others quietly whispered apologies. The elderly baker reached for her hands with trembling fingers. "We forgot who you really were," she admitted softly. Evelyn smiled through her tears. "Then let us remember together." Elder Marcus finally stepped down from the platform. His voice was no longer filled with authority, only humility. "Evelyn Carter, the judgment against you is withdrawn. Mooncrest welcomes you home, if you are willing to return." Evelyn looked around the familiar square, seeing not the crowd that had rejected her, but people learning from their greatest mistake. She took a slow breath before answering. "A home becomes stronger when it learns to choose truth over fear. I never stopped loving Mooncrest. I only hoped Mooncrest would someday remember how to love the truth." Warm sunlight spread across the plaza as clouds drifted apart, bathing the ancient stones in golden light. The great white wolf quietly sat beside Evelyn, and Kale smiled as though the journey had finally reached the ending it had always deserved. He had searched for a traitor and found instead a woman whose kindness had survived betrayal without becoming bitterness. Sometimes destiny does not arrive to change who we are. Sometimes it simply reveals the character that has been there all along. And sometimes the greatest victory is not proving everyone else wrong, but refusing to let injustice steal the goodness inside your own heart. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share this video with someone who still believes kindness is true strength. We would also love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you had been standing in Mooncrest that day, would you have believed the crowd, or would you have chosen to believe the Omega before judging her?